columnist for Vanity Fair and author of the book The Man Who Owns the News, Inside the Secret World of Rupert Murdoch, also founder of the website Newser.com. Hello again.
Keith, how are you?
Elevating Al Sharpton inside this non-apology apology. Obviously, he was the guy, the opportunist that they referred to several times, though, but not by name, and attacking those who were upset, who they felt were not legitimately upset. Was that a smart move?
It's an extraordinary move. It's just like you hit your head, and from my understanding is that the Post PR people, been the PR people for the Post for a long time, they also smacked their head and said to Carl Allen, who's the editor of the paper, "Are you nuts?" And Carl, who's an incredibly angry guy, a guy who throws things, you know, a guy who smacks his in my book I recount a scene where he smacks his fist down and his cufflinks break apart. You know, he said we're doing it this way and we're going after Sharpton. Now Sharpton was just one of rather a large group of people who yesterday said, hey, wait a minute, there's something wrong with this. But by singling Sharpton out, Carl Allen suddenly made Al Sharpton the spokesperson for this. Suddenly, we have a situation which is I guess sort of Imus-like in its snowball effect. Now, this is all about Carl Allen. It's all about, he chose the cartoon, he put Al Sharpton in place to go after the Post, and he has become the focus of everybody's annoyance, if not rage.
So how big does the snowball get, and who does it run over if it runs over anybody?
Well, I think that it runs over Carl Allen. It's running over him right now. But the danger inside of News Corp is it could run over many other people. It could run over the company. I mean, it could run over. It's now running toward Rupert Murdoch, and it's running in the form of the issue of the waiver, which is exactly what Al Sharpton is attacking. Because in order to own the New York Post and television stations, Rupert Murdoch had to get a waiver. So the Sharpton people and the full range of people protesting this are going at Rupert Murdoch's weakest spot, this waiver, and they are going at it at a moment in time. Let's remember, we have this cartoon which portrays the president, the black president, as a monkey. Not to mention, there's also a governor who's black.
Yes.
So suddenly, Carl Allen is the most isolated man in the state of New York, I would say.
So is this the sort of thing where Murdoch might break precedent and follow up this sort of tepid fists up apology with an intervention of his own?
It would be breaking precedent. I mean, the thing that Rupert Murdoch never, ever, ever does is acknowledge public pressure, acknowledge that there are other people beyond News Corp, the sovereign state of News Corp. Now, he will do it later on. There was, I think there was another cartoon once upon a time after JFK Jr. died. Oh, yes. And there was the suggestion of, I think it was a hideous cartoon with Joe Kennedy and in hell and the devil saying, "I'm gonna." Oh, it was just terrible. Yeah. But the person who approved that was not fired on the spot. But 6 months later, he was. He gently disappeared. So there is. It is not as if everybody gets away with anything in this company. It's just that Rupert Murdoch doesn't like to acknowledge that he's been forced to do something. However, if there is a sense that this is closing in, that this is going to cost News Corp, yeah, Carl Allen will be out of there in a New York minute. I mean, he's going to be out of there in an Australian minute.
In a Murdoch minute.
Yeah, soon anyway.
But we could, I mean, Rupert could just say, well, I saw it and I didn't like it, so I'm making this change, and not acknowledge the public pressure at that point. Maybe
right,
that's his
but I think the really interesting thing is how much is coming from inside of the company now. I mean, since I started to write about this yesterday on Newser.com, I've gotten nothing but calls from people within the Post. Everybody's in a whisper mode. I mean, certainly the people at Page 6, you know, have begun. Have now had deflected calls. They said, listen, don't call us, call the news desk, not us.
Yeah, when page 6 takes a moral stance, you know the original issue is a significant one. Michael Wolff of Vanity Fair and the author of The Man Who Owns the News, Inside the Secret World of Rupert Murdoch, and the proprietor of Newser.com. Thank you again. We'll, obviously, I think we'll talk about this one more time.
Keith, I think we're going to be talking about this for some time.
I think that all Americans should be appalled by this cartoon, racist and sensitive cartoon that was in the New York Post. But the New York Post also has had a history of doing stuff like this.
Joining us now with their views on the New York Post statement today are Barathunde Thurston, co-founder of JackAndJillPolitics.com, and Cenk Uygur. Barathunde, let's start with you. The Post says, to those who were offended by the image, we apologize. How is that?
Well, first of all, I'd just like to say it's pretty appropriate to have a conversation about race with David Shuster, Barathunde Thurston, and Cenk Uygur. I think we're kind of halfway there already. Look, we all know that when someone says, I'm sorry if certain people are offended, what they're saying is, I'm not really sorry. And what Spike said, I say what he said to that. You know, the New York Post does have a history in this case, so the apology is a formality, but it clearly wasn't very sincere.
Cenk Uygur, your view.
I think it's a bad idea to call this racist. Is the cartoon offensive? Of course. Is it insensitive? Certainly. But once you call something racist, everybody starts backpedaling away, and we don't have that dialogue that Eric Holder, our Attorney General, told us to have. He said we're a nation of cowards, but people are scared of being called racist or other names. So I think it's a bad idea to shut off conversation that way.
But, Cenk, why is it so difficult for the New York Post simply to say, we're sorry, and leave it at that?
I think partly because they feel they're under attack. Now, I don't want to defend the New York Post. I don't like the New York Post. I take issue with them on many other issues, and I take issue with the cartoon itself. I think it was a bad idea. But once you get somebody under attack, then they go back to their foxholes and they say, hey, you know what? Then I'm going to fight back, and I'm going to stand up, and I'm not going to give you the apology that you're looking for. And I've seen it happen with, you know, people that I've discussed this with throughout L.A. When I talk to white people about it, they go, what's the big deal? I mean, why is everybody calling it racist? You see how they're instantly defensive. When you want to ask them the question, can you not see how it might be offensive?
Barathunde, here's what the governor, David Paterson, has said today. He said, I think that what some who are offended are saying is that the reference to President Obama seemed rather obvious to a lot of people. The Post has said that was not their intention, and I think that at this time when tensions are running high with an economy down, and also, you know, even the media outlets having to lay off people, it is an act of sensitivity that I applaud, because it is very easy to get into these types of fights. People are easily offended. I mean, I've been vindicated. I've indicated that I've been offended by a few things that have gone on and on and on, et cetera, et cetera. What do you think of Governor Paterson's statement?
Well, I think Governor Paterson does make a solid point, and I'd really like to return to what Cenk was saying. What I tried to bring up on Wednesday when we talk about this is less about perceptions and feeling and more about the real harm. And I cited a UCLA professor, Philip Atiba Goff, and what he studied is, you know, the actual racial disparities and discrimination, not whether white people feel guilty or whether black people are too insensitive, but why there are so many in prison, why police are more violent toward those who have browner skin than they need to be based on all available evidence and all the rules of the land. So that's the conversation that I think the country should be courageous enough to have. I think sensitivity is important, but it's the real harm that I'm much more concerned about.
And Cenk, doesn't the New York Post get in the way of that conversation when the New York Post can't even issue an apology correctly? I mean, that's a great conversation, as Barathunde said, that we ought to be having. Instead, the New York Post has again made it about the New York Post.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, David, but in this case, I'm not buying it, to be honest with you, because, look, we get into two different camps, and we get entrenched in those positions. I read what Barathunde is talking about that Dr. Goff published. I went to Jack and Jill Politics, his website, and he makes a great point. But the New York Post and the people, much more importantly, because I don't really care about the New York Post, the people who support the New York Post or other people who feel like, hey, why is this offensive, are not going to hear any of that if, like you see with Spike Lee and Al Sharpton in that case, you yell at racism. Then they won't have the conversation. And that conversation is critical. I agree with Eric Holder.
And I agree.
But then how do we get to the conversation that Barathunde is saying that we obviously need to have?
I mean, if I could jump in, I think cartoons like this, although they were muddy, I think the satirical point was pretty much lost. And I do comedy. You know, I actually like a lot of offensive comedy that's out there if there's a clear point, if there's a target, and if it's saying something constructive. I think this was pretty unclear for those who defended and very clear for those who were offended by it. But I do think the cartoon served a purpose that we actually are having this conversation. We're talking about psychological studies. We're talking about police brutality. We're talking about the role of satire in society. So even though this began as a confusing and potentially destructive act, it turns into a more constructive conversation than the one that was happening a week ago.
Well, Barathunde, you've changed my mind on this. Maybe the New York Post can continue with their crazy statements to keep this story going, because it is a conversation that we need to have. And if the New York Post's own stupidity is the reason we're going to keep going, then I guess God bless them. In any case, Barathunde, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Cenk, Uygur, we appreciate you coming on as well. Good stuff.
Thank you.